I'm really delighted to be able to introduce our next speaker, Nathan Proctor. And to do that, I just wanted to recollect my first memory of meeting Nathan, which was at a conference in DC, my only time in DC, and you'll hear why that's appropriate. But it was at a conference called The Maintainers. We were both plenary speakers at this conference. And if you haven't heard of the Maintainers conferences or research network, they're also, fellow travellers in this topic of how to focus on breakdown, repair and infrastructure as a key complement to the way that we think about technology innovation. But at this Maintainers conference, Nathan gave a talk about right to repair, and I also remember some stories from that talk that were pretty noteworthy, just in terms of some of the behaviour that he had seen that others had also seen, it turns out, after his talk, about how some of the hardware companies were behaving, in terms of the pressure they were feeling about right to repair. And maybe he will share some of those stories with us as part of his talk. But yes, people having tantrums about new regulation coming in and what they should or should not be doing to respond to it. And yeah, this activism around repair has been ongoing for many years now, and Nathan's been right in the heart of it. He's currently Senior Director of the Public Interest Research Group's Right to Repair campaign, which stretches across dozens of states and includes shareholder, congressional and federal advocacy to protect people's ability to repair modern electronics. He's a member of the Grist 50 list of emerging leaders from across the US who are working on fresh, real-world solutions to our world's biggest challenges. That's a pretty good way to be introduced. And he normally lives in Arlington, but I believe he's joining us from Denver today, so another person on the move. And I've asked Nathan to give us an overview of what's happening in the US, because so much has happened just in the last couple of weeks on this topic that it is hard to keep track. He's graciously agreed to come and give us this update. So Nathan, thank you so much for being here, and over to you.
Hello. I'm gonna just somebody nod that that the hearing is working and everything.
Yes,
Yeah, just
you're looking
all
good.
right. The technology is better. All we needed was a global pandemic for this technology to improve past Skype. Not sure
Yeah.
we won that deal. I'm actually reaching you from Boston. Our meetings to Denver. Speaking of COVID, our meetings to Denver were canceled. But uh, I'm happy, and you get the advantage of a hearing from me in a more philosophical state of mind, because once it gets past 8 o'clock, I start being more of a philosopher. So
That's
I'm so
perfect.
happy to talk to you today about our recent experiences on right to repair, and I want to take a start by just saying, like, when I think about, Mel just introduced me saying, we're part of this maintainers group and these are kind of fellow travelers. I feel like I have to explicitly say what the traveling is. And I think, it's dawned on me, and I've been in advocacy and activism, for my whole career since I graduated college in 2005, and a lot of it with the PIRG network, but also with some other organizations. I've just become convinced that the most important problems facing the world is kind of a transition between a world seeking to grow, seeking to increase and expand, to a world which finds stability. And that's why maintainers is something that really grabbed me, because all of the challenges are about keeping the beautiful thing that we've inherited around and alive and still healthy. And to me, right to repair is obviously part of that, part of the way I execute that vision. So let me just, we got starting with this, a little bit of a nice picture from CalPIRG. This is actually from last week. This is us out in front of the California legislature, CalPIRG and CalPIRG students, pressing for them to pass a right to repair bill. I want to talk to you a little bit about, what PIRG is, how we try to make change in the world, what the problem that we're trying to solve with right to repair is, and how that connects to other connected, like what the vision is that's beyond just the policy, and then a little bit about some of the updates we've seen very recently. So just quickly about US PIRG. So US PIRG is a US based advocacy organization with chapters all over the states. Mel introduced it pretty well, but we use, we do independent research, and then we do advocacy, both in state houses. We do a lot with the media. We do a lot with shareholder actions. But the idea is that we would speak out about ideas where the public is generally with us, but for some reason the right thing is not happening. And we see ourselves as kind of like a counterbalance to the power and influence of basically special interest lobbyists, corporate lobbyists, and the way that they influence policymaking in America. And a lot of that is done, by pioneering policies at the state level, recognizing that, kind of the more that we distribute our campaigns, the more that we kind of build a real grassroots movement behind them, the more we have opportunities to kind of find ways to break through the defenses that the status quo, especially the powerful status quo, can put in our way. And this is just a map of some of the different places where both PIRG, the public interest research groups, and our sister organization, Environment America, have operations. Environment America also works pretty closely with me on right to repair. So that's a little bit about us. And, I think people know the problem, right? That, we make and use and toss things at a ridiculous, alarming, unsustainable rate. For Americans, that's 6.9 million tons per year. This to me is like the graphic, and this is also behind me. We buy $1,000 supercomputers. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. They have like 7 devices on Star Trek to do what one Apple's iPhone does, and yet somehow they're disposable. That's just crazy town. That's absurd. And and people, like, there's this graphic here. That's a pile of e-waste that we generate, and the little building on the right is the Empire State Building. So we have this massive problem. So what other problem we're trying to solve? And I kind of think of it this way, right? There's obviously like a set of connected behaviors, but I focus on these 3. That manufacturers seek to monopolize access to repair materials in order to control the repair process, right? They also design their products so that they're hostile to repair, so that repair is difficult or impossible, or they're just negligent about how the products are made. And so in effect, they become impossible to repair or maintain. And that you could think of consumers' throwaway mentality as either a behavior or an impact. But I think for this, the way we think about the campaign, we have to target it specifically and try to address it, because it does drive a part of it's driven by what manufacturers are doing, but it's also, and advertising, but it's also something that we can control and impact. And, then obviously taking a step back, what do we look at in the world that happens because repair is restricted, devices aren't fixable, and people don't care about repair? You see repair price gouging. This is, obviously there's all kinds of devices that we're dealing with in right to repair. For a John Deere tractor, there's not like people buying a John Deere tractor and then just getting rid of it after 18 months because the new model came out, right? Those are $800,000 pieces of equipment. But they do get, basically, they're held over a barrel by the technology in terms of who can fix it and for how much. Repair shops, the infrastructure is being, undermined, and is eventually we're going to lose really important parts of that. Forced upgrades are routine. I'm just reading a slide. This is not public speaking 101. You can write that down. I think the other thing that we talk about, and it matters in different policy circles depending on the policymakers, is, we throw out, we've built far more devices than are necessary to get every single person in the world on the internet. But still a third of the world isn't. And I think, that's a policy choice that was made. And, it's a result of not being able to maintain, fix, or use things for longer. It dries out there's tertiary, secondary, tertiary markets. And in this country, we call that the digital divide. And then, of course, there's an increasing climate impact from the manufacturing. It takes a ridiculous amount of energy to make electronics. In fact, I did a study that if Americans use their cell phone for 1 year longer on average, it would have the same benefits to the climate as taking 636,000 cars off the road, which is about the number of registered vehicles in New Mexico. I should have pulled up a stat for how much of Australia that would be relevant to. But and Kyle Wiens, CEO of iFixit, often shares this slide, and I just love this cartoon. I think this encapsulates it pretty perfectly. This is a new problem. We invented this problem. Like, people acting naturally, doing the things that they naturally did not throw away expensive, difficult to manufacture electronics. This is a choice that we've made, and it's one that we're trying to unmake. And so one of the main ways that we go around trying to fix this problem is we have this model legislation that we've introduced now in 45 of the 50 American states. It requires manufacturers to provide, on fair and reasonable terms, the basic materials that repair technicians use to diagnose, maintain, repair devices. And that would be, manuals, schematics, documentation, spare parts, and any kind of tool. Increasingly, these are software tools, and increasingly repair is restricted with software. I mean, this, John Deere, I brought up John Deere before, but like, if you trying to fix a John Deere tractor and you don't have access to the John Deere software tool, there's an incredibly limited amount of things you could actually accomplish. Even changing turn signals, I've been told, requires a dealer to come out and plug in his computer and hit a button so that the part, talks to the computer in the right way. It's basically a firmware installation, but they've found a way to basically require a dealership call in those instances, right? So this is a little map of, and I'm sorry for people who are red, green, colorblind. This was not my decision. This is the map. The red states are places where we had an active bill at some point this year. Green are places where we've actually passed a bill. And then the slanty lines, those are places where we've had bills in the past but didn't end up having one this year. So all to say, these bills are being introduced all over the U.S., here, there, and everywhere. So I want to talk a little bit about like the last year. So we had been working on this for years, and we hadn't gotten a bill over the finish line. I had one of the main tech association lobbyists tell me to my face that like I'd never pass a bill, that if I ever got close, and all the CEOs of these companies would come in and lean to squash it, and we should really negotiate an MOU or something like that. And he really should not have told me that. That really lit a fire. And I relished passing bills, I think, in part because you don't tell me I can't do it, because I clearly can. So the first bill we passed was in New York, and this was actually quite a good bill. But the governor actually, under extreme pressure, this lobbyist was right about one thing, under extreme pressure from manufacturers, ended up just basically tearing that bill to putting all kinds of loopholes and crazy language in that bill. But then soon after that, we passed our first wheelchair right to bill in Colorado, and that was followed by the same champion, Brianna Titone, brought back a tractor right to repair bill, and we passed that bill in Colorado. You can't see that, but Danny Wood, who's the second from my right there, he drove his giant 900 horsepower tractor onto the Capitol steps in Denver, which was pretty sweet. Made for a good bill signing. And then we passed a bill, our broadest right to repair bill in June in Minnesota. This is a picture of Kyle Wiens of iFixit and me doing it digitally, presenting our senator with an award after we won that bill. And then, meanwhile, as these states are advancing, the manufacturers have started, in part because of the shareholder pressure, part of our operation is running shareholder campaigns. They've started to voluntarily, in preparation essentially of legislation passing, debut these voluntary programs, in part to build the muscle memory for how to execute fully empowering user and independent repair. So first, Microsoft was really the first one to agree of the big tech companies. Apple has been tricky. They've introduced a couple different programs which have been kind of savaged by the media as being kind of pretty hollow. But I like this headline. I think captures how a lot of people feel about this moment that hell froze over, and Apple this just in the last week endorsed the right to repair bill that's moving in California, which is a very strong bill. And you can guess, like everybody else, about why Apple is doing what it's doing at this point. I don't care. I'm just glad that they're doing it. I think this is an idea that's here to stay and that we've won the public on. And so I kind of made this chart today. Maybe I'll think about this a little bit differently on a different day, but just to reflect on what has been gained and kind of what remains to do, right? So I think it's fair to say that we won broad agreement on that there should be some access to repair materials outside of the manufacturer's control. That you have to take that to the dealer, you have to take that to the Apple authorized service provider. I don't think that that's going to fly anymore, right? And I think that at this point, there's, at least in the U.S., I think that there's kind of policy and public, I wouldn't say consensus, but strong, agreement that that's what's going to happen. And I do think that that's going to be around for a long time. I don't think that was a temporary win. I wouldn't be worried about, let's just say, if the government changed hands from Joe Biden to somebody else, that a Republican administration would go around trying to squash the right to repair. And I think that that's probably not going to happen, because I don't think that this was done, as a kind of unilateral public choice, not just a narrow political choice, which I think is very important and is one of the ways that I've always pursued social change. And then this is true for most industries, and I said some still fighting, and then what gets to do, and I first listed medical devices. This continues to be, if you want to hear some stories, the medical device people are they have crazy profit margins on those service contracts, and they will do, they will be very aggressive to protect that. They sue hospitals and independent service providers all day long for trying to fix devices, claiming that it's a violation of their copyright. We passed an exemption to copyright law saying it should not be a copyright crime to fix a piece of medical equipment, that copyright and fixing medical equipment, those don't belong together. After we successfully argued for that exemption, the medical device industry sued to invalidate the entire copyright regime, which oversees that process. So they're kind of take no prisoners. I still think we need more to deal with the way in which people expect products to be handled and the ecosystem in which they live, right? I think if you want people to fix things and not throw them out, they need to, one, be able to fix them. There needs to be an actual option with a service provider who has an incentive to complete the repair and not upsell them the newest device. And then it needs to be affordable and convenient and part of the practice. And so I think that there's a lot that can be done to just make it more likely that people do this, to build cultural value in those things, to create incentives for manufacturers to make products that do this, to create consequences when they do things that, lead in end up in premature obsolescence. And I also think that one of the key kind of paradigm pieces of technology is that it's all built like with one purpose in mind, to accomplish one purpose, and then it doesn't do anything else. Like that's all there is to it. And I think if we really want to embrace a more sustainable relationship with technology, we need to liberate the hardware from a completely proprietary universe. It's unreasonable to expect manufacturers to support hardware forever. But then if that's the expectation, then it's also ridiculous that they would not make a way for somebody else to put other software on it that they would be willing to support. And I think that when you look at like a Windows computer and how, there's multiple software choices within that environment, or you could switch to Linux or something. There's just, but the actual computing power in the computer is not completely locked into one use. But everything else in our world is now increasingly this direction. And we see right to repair as one way to challenge whether or not there should be a paradigm shift in how we think about computing, so that we don't have to rebuild the same chips and the same memory and the same batteries for device after device after device with limited resources. And that just seems absurd if you change the goal from maximum profit, maximum production to living within, maximizing quality of life within the bounds of this planet. Yeah, and then so that's the end of my overview. That took less time than I thought it was going to take. So I guess I could take questions now.
Exactly.
Yeah, or I could, I could tell funny stories. I guess Mel thinks I have some of those.
They may overlap, actually, Nathan. So we have people here in the room who will speak into a mic for questions while you have a chance to catch your breath. And we also have people online who I think are probably going to be wanting to chat. So yeah, take some time to get into the mood of your philosophical thoughts you'd like to share. We have a question up the back.
Hi there. Thanks for that. Yeah, my name's Jason Wilson. I'm actually a reporter. I'm just here out of curiosity. And,
Can't quote me on any of this.
So I was struck, you did mention, Linux. And I'm going to double up if that's not too cheeky. You did mention Linux right at the end there. And, I do notice on your website currently there's a campaign at the top to stop Microsoft basically ending support for Windows 10, which is great. But I'd kind of hazard a guess, as you sort of alluded to at the end, that a lot of those machines could run perfectly well on Linux and or some other, whatever, FreeBSD, whatever. And that given people's workflows now, a lot of people will be happy on any machine that can run a browser, basically. And so, this crisis, it seems to me, with ending support for Windows 10, I just wonder if your list of problems encompasses something which I've observed in every place I've ever worked in with an IT shop, which is the kind of vendor lock-in with you must have Windows, Microsoft basically locking in IT shops, and conversely the problem which is that public money maybe in an ideal world might be tied to software choices that are more in tune with the longevity of devices and stuff like that, because what we're talking about here is really a software problem, not a problem with the repairability or longevity of hardware, with respect to Windows 10. That's the first one. The second one was, going back to your cartoon, you know, I don't know. I was born in the 70s. We may be roughly the same vintage, and I remember at that time, at least in Australia, and I'm based in the US now, but in Australia then, while people were more than prepared to repair mechanical devices, outside enthusiast circles, I'm just wondering if you have more insight than me as to when there was there actually a time when people in general were prepared or capable of repairing electronics, or is that actually something new that we have to have in the world? Is it something that's disappeared, or is it actually something that we have to create anew, so to speak? So yeah, sorry to double up, but they're my questions.
Yeah, to answer the first question, yes, the idea of software obsolescence and kind of being locked into a particular software environment, not being able to escape it and reuse the product in other ways. This is something that we are working on. We're trying to think of the right policy way to build a support, and I think one of the reasons why we're campaigning, for example, around Chromebooks and the very, very short lifespan that's built into those, and schools are having fleets of thousands of Chromebooks that are all ending software support, and right now the ask is for Google to extend the support for those, and of course every single time we do anything about that campaign, there's like 5 people on social media who say you should program Linux on these things, and I think that, to me, just the way that I always thought about campaigning is like you try to go from where the public is, and then you try to craft a solution that actually solves a problem within the world that we live in, and then you try to use that process of campaigning to then open people's minds, to then try to shift their understanding of these things. Like, nobody thinks about software obsolescence in a laptop. They just haven't had to think about those things. It's time to start thinking about those things. Not just, and it's not, of course we're targeting Google, but it's not like Google's the first company to not have a good software support timeline for their product. It's in part, they could do something to help it, and people need to think about this problem, and they're not thinking about it. So right. I still think that when I think about that part of the campaign, it's really awareness raising, and then having very discrete and doable, not huge lists for these companies, right? Like Microsoft made the decision to shut off Windows 10 support in 2025. 400 million computers will lose support at that point. I hope all the ones that are still working get Linux installed. That's not going to happen. And I think that they could reduce the electronic waste. We call it waste 2K of that moment, if they were to extend support a little bit. But we do need to raise consciousness in the public. And then your second part about is like, did we ever have repair infrastructure? And the answer is yes. That you can look at Bureau of Labor and Statistics data. We had a lot of independent small repair shops fixing vacuum cleaners and televisions. And you could go to Radio Shack when I was a kid in the 80s, not quite the 70s, but close. And you could get a schematic diagram for just about any piece of electronics. And you could go to the McMaster car catalog, of which we had a big stack in my house, and find the SKU and get any part. And me and my dad used to fix the dishwasher and the things. And now those things are all, there's a proprietary Bluetooth connected dongle that they make, and you can't even fix the dishwasher now without some kind of ridiculous, control from some distant software company. So, yeah, I mean, I do think that they are trying to remove the infrastructure, and you can measure that. I do see 2 questions in the chat, Mel. I don't know if.
Oh yeah, you can see that. That's great. I was going to summarize those for you as our.
Oh yeah, no, I got it up here.
That's great. Okay, so let's take those 2 together maybe, because I really like the way that they will round out what's been a really rich discussion. Go for it.
Yeah, so MC, who will be talking about electric vehicles next, and I'm excited about that. We've been doing a lot more in that space. Asked about students, and so I we have this is my opening slide, but this is the CalPIRG student chapter working on Right to Repair. They set up a giant pile of 500 pounds of electronic waste in front of the state capitol last week. I think when we started this campaign, I don't think we had the kind of passion from the students, but we're starting to see that more and more, that we're getting more and more students who are thinking about these things, and that's really exciting. And then I also, whether or not the exact kind of activism that MC is referencing in Montana, which if you haven't seen that story, you should just search youth activism Montana. It was a really interesting story about this lawsuit brought by students. I do think that that's an interesting thing. We haven't talked about that right now. I mean, my approach to social change is always like win hearts and minds in the biggest, broadest way. And I have like right now, Right to Repair kind of works in that space, so I'll keep going on that, and I'll just stand in solidarity with other cool projects that other people are doing that seem to break through. But I kind of have found my spot in the world, which is just talking about this stuff as publicly as I can. And then Sylvia asks, that I made a passing comment about companies blocking repair access to materials, or blocking access to materials needed for repair. Can you please expand on that? So let me just give, what you need to fix a product is typically, skills, right? Manufacturers can't stop that. Parts, tools, and information, right? If you have the spare part that you need, if you've got the documentation that you need, if you have the tooling, whether it's physical tools or software tools you need to diagnose or reset the materials, you're set. Manufacturers basically, different manufacturers in different industries just block different parts of things, right? Kyle Ween started iFixit because he used to work at an Apple authorized repair shop. He broke his laptop when he went to college, and he found out that not only can you not find Apple's service manual that he used to use every day as a technician, but Apple will sue anybody that posts the service manual under copyright grounds. So he was like, fine, I'll make my own manual. And he made it, put it online, that's iFixit. So there's also, like, I give the example of software tools necessary that you restrict. That would be the example of John Deere. But for a lot of these companies, like if you break your television, almost always, if your television breaks, it's the circuit, it's the motherboard in the back of the television. If Sony won't sell you that replacement board, where are you going to get it? Can you fashion your own control board for your television without the part from Sony? No, you really can't. So all of those things are ubiquitous in basically every industry. And then in some industries, they even restrict training. They won't let you. There was a class action lawsuit against General Electric because they were kicking people who were employed by other independent service organizations out of trainings for their medical equipment because they didn't want anybody else to know how to fix it. So all those things are restricted.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful response, which I think we'll come back to later today when we hear about what repair practices are happening elsewhere in the world. With that, thank you so much, Nathan, for joining us at an uncomfortable hour. We're really, really grateful to you, and we're very inspired by what you're doing, and we really wish you all the best to succeed with all of that legislation in front of people in the US. So thank you again.